Good morning, everybody. I hope I'm right in saying that people have now been able to join us to this webinar to discuss hate speech and what grassroots community actors can do about it. And that hopefully includes many of the people on this call. So what I want to do is briefly introduce you to our participants who are joining us. We've got one missing at the moment, but we're very much hoping he will join from Iraq very shortly. There may be some connection issues, but I'm sure he'll join as soon as he can. But on the screen in front of you, you can see Sabiha Shaheen, who is the Executive Director of Baragad, which is a very exciting youth-led and focused organization operating in Pakistan. And also you can see Harun Baloch, who works for a technology specialist rights company called Bytes for All, also based in Pakistan. We hope to have joining us also Pishtiwan Faraj from Iraq, who works for an organization called IMOC, which stands for Independent Media Organization of Kurdistan. And all of these partners are joining us today to hear about their involvement in a hate speech toolkit that we have been working together to produce. And on the screen at the moment, you can see just a few extracts from the toolkit. It's a very hands-on publication. It's intended to allow anyone in most contexts in the world to see and learn from what MRG and our partners have been doing over really 3.5 years, and what we've been learning about what can be done about hate speech without necessarily passing legislation or involving social media companies becoming a bit more responsible. So what we're going to do today is talk to you a little bit about some of the things that came up in the process of developing the work that feeds into this toolkit and what it's based on. If you want to see more details about the toolkit, Noah will in a moment pop a link into the Q&A that you will be able to access the whole toolkit with the many different options of things that our partners showed could be done when you were faced with a hate speech situation affecting your community that you wanted to do something about. But first of all, before we do that, if we stop sharing screens and we turn to the participants, and maybe Harun, you might like to put your camera on now, just to ask Sabiha and Harun to tell us, maybe starting with Sabiha, what made you start to get involved in the issue of hate speech? What made you start to think about doing this kind of work?
Thank you very much, Claire. Actually, this is a very, very big issue in Pakistan. Unfortunately, we are suffering for the last 3 decades, violence and terrorism and many very hard issues in Pakistan, unfortunately. We have seen very bad situations collectively, individually in society. For example, we have suffered, I think, a biggest terrorist attack, for example, in case of APS, Army Public School, where 126 children died. And it was obviously very, very horrible event. And then we have seen many events, unfortunately, very painful events with minorities in Pakistan. For example, if I quote Shama case, and honestly, even it's really difficult for me to explain that event. A pregnant young woman with her husband, she was burned. She was burned alive. So, you know, these things are like not easy for a common man. It's a trauma. And for me, it was a biggest trauma, for example, when you realize and when you think and when you heard a pregnant woman, a young woman. And then we have seen so many unfortunate events in Pakistan where we've seen burning minorities' home and the localities, and then, like, you know, lynching, the incidents of lynching, so many things. So actually, we we always think, why this is happening, why these people, these so-called normal people, they are doing this with other people just like them, and they even they don't care like about women and children. So obviously when we thinking about this and started working on these issues, then we came to on this conclusion that actually there is an incitement, there's a words, and there's our sentences, and there's our like there's are something where people get it's a very like bad word, but like, you know, where they get ready to even for this violence. So we made this link that between violence and this action of violence, there is a link where there is a speech. For example, if any priest or maybe any Maulvi, they when they speech, then they say something, people instigate for violence. So I think, so like if we want to stop violence in our country, which we want to stop, if we want to stop this terrorism in our country, which we really want to, then we have to think about this hate speech, and sometimes we say dangerous speech.
Oh, looks like the bee has frozen there, at least for me. I think it's just Sabiha. Haroon, if you can hear me, maybe you can jump in there and tell us why you started working on hate speech in Pakistan.
Yeah, sure. Definitely all the context that, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All the context that Sabiha was already talking about, the terrorism context and the radicalism in Pakistan was one of the reasons. But beyond that, since we started monitoring hate speech back in 2012 and 2013, and our primary focus was initially not focusing on the religious minorities issues, but especially in the context of freedom of expression and freedom of expression with the intersection of different other thematic areas. For example, when we talk about hate speech in the context of gender, or hate speech in the context of political figures, or other, for example, journalists or human rights defenders, and then definitely religious minorities was very much there. But then initial study that we conducted was that we wanted to map out the trends encompassing all the shades of hate speech in Pakistan, especially in the context of online spaces. We know that hate speech was very much there in Pakistan because of the radical ideologies that were there in Pakistan, especially when it comes to discussing different faiths living in Pakistan. For example, Shia, Ahmadis, or different religions, for example, Christians, Hindus, Sikh, Baha'is, etc., etc. So I mean, all these religious minority or faith-based groups are there. So we know that in the offline spaces there were violence in Pakistan, especially in the context of Shia and Ahmadis. So we actually wanted to see that after explosion of technology and online spaces and social media in Pakistan, and with increasing outreach and access in Pakistan, we actually wanted to see what are the connections between online and offline hate speech, and are there incidents which we could track that have implications vice versa. So this was the entire premise. So this is how we actually started. And when we published our first study back in 2013, that was a very interesting time, that Supreme Court was hearing one of the religious minorities case with regards to their equal rights and discrimination against religious minorities. And when our study got published, and it got the attention of the Chief Justice of Pakistan as well at that time. And when we saw the judgment in 2014, so that judgment interestingly quoted that study where we actually had mapped out the different shades of hate speech, and specifically in the context of religious minorities. And then afterwards, we also saw that Supreme Court also constituted one of the enforcement commission. It's a single body commission, and like it is still functioning, and it has the mandate to check what is the progress of that judgment vis-a-vis the implementation. And we saw that there were clear instructions that hate speech in online spaces and offline spaces, it also needs to be checked. So, I mean, these were really encouraging moment for us that how we can further build on our work. Then we also were involved in checking out the trends in the entire South Asia and Asian region. So we also conducted a couple of studies, but like this is how we started to we started monitoring hate speech in online spaces.
Okay, that's very helpful. I just want to stick with Harun for a moment, because you mentioned that you through doing this work, you managed to get an understanding of who was being impacted by hate speech or the kind of trends. Or so can you tell us briefly who is being impacted, and how does that look in terms of patterns over time and space?
Yeah, it's very interesting because we have been monitoring hate speech in online spaces at least for and using artificial intelligence tools I think since 2018. And then we have mapped out trends, and it's not only related to what sort of hate speech is being spewed, but also who are the perpetrators, who are people behind these hate speech issues. So we have mapped out trends that whenever there are events happening in offline spaces, for example, important religious event, for example, if there is anything related to Christian, such as Easter or Christmas events, so we would see that there is a spike of hate speech in online spaces, because when Muslims or mainstream people, when they will greet to their Christian friends or maybe the Hindu friends during their Diwali or such events which they celebrate in Pakistan. So I mean, Muslim would start spewing hate, and they would make it a reason that Muslims should not greet them because they are Christians, they are not Muslims, and for Muslims greeting to non-Muslims is a sin. And this is how, like, you know, different often online hate events are interconnected, and this hate speech gets worsened when it comes to greeting or when it comes to speaking for certain faith within Islam, such as Ahmadis. If you are a Muslim, no matter if you are a Sunni Muslim or Shia Muslim, so if you would speak in favor of Ahmadis in Pakistan, or if there is any event or incident that happened with regards to Ahmadis, such as desecration of Ahmadis mosques or their worship places or their tombs. So I mean, these incidents are very frequent in Pakistan. If someone would condemn those incidents and speak in their favor, so they would receive a lot of hate speech, and this is how, like, you know, they are targeted. And in the context of certain religious or faith-based minorities such as Shia and Ahmadis, they are very, very vulnerable.
Okay, that's very interesting. So your work allowed you to understand both the religious minorities as they're viewed in Pakistan, but also the sectarian differences within Islam that was impacting on hate speech. I just want to turn to Sabiha for a moment and to say that maybe, Sabiha, you can tell us very briefly about what the work that you did with young people, because you're a young person's organization. So how did you interact with young people about hate speech, and what did you hear from them about how they saw hate speech?
Yeah, I think being a youth organization, we are working with young people. And when we went to university students and particularly talking about hate speech, the first thing we came across that it was a confusion. Young people had a confusion about this hate speech because they mix it. hate speech and freedom of speech. So there was a confusion. Then they usually were not aware of hate speech, technical definition of hate speech. So they ask such questions, and usually what happened, they say, there is a lot of hate speech against Muslim. So they had one concern. And then there is a lot of hate speech from West for us. And then they mix Islamophobia. So there was a confusion. One thing that obviously it took a lot of time to, we never said directly, no, this is definition and stuff like that. So we had a method, we have a methodology, and through that methodology, we discuss with them and we ask questions, and then we give them group work, and we give them different exercises. And through exercises, we try to tell them what is hate speech and why we are condemning them, and why we are countering them. So I think this was the one thing which we came across. And obviously, then when they got to know the true definition and especially the consequences of hate speech. So what we did, we make a relationship because hate speech is not just a sentence and hate speech. It instigates people for violence. So we made this relationship, and it works a lot. Then people think, usually people were against violence, but they somehow follow the hate speech. For example, as Harun was mentioning, the source of hate speech. I think the source of hate speech is really dangerous, but I think the mainstream people who follow that trend is more dangerous, because you can identify the source. But when this big chunk of and big segment of society, they are so-called mainstream society, and they're very regular, normal people, but they follow that trend. For example, I'll give just one example, as he mentioned about greetings. Sometimes they say, okay, just all of a sudden you see one Facebook post, if you wish Merry Christmas, it's a sin. So someone somewhere, someone is posting that post, but that is, I think that is, I know, okay, I think something, but that the majority are following them, and they're regular people, they're literate people, they're educated people. And once it just started, this thing, Khuda Hafiz and Allah Hafiz, we always said Khuda Hafiz, but then this trend came, no, don't say Khuda, because Khuda is of everyone. So Khuda is universal. We have Allah, such kind of things. And this is very much into young people. And then obviously we did in different universities, we have discussions, we have group discussions, we have trainings, we had done social action projects. And end of the 3 years, we are so happy. Now those young people are working, monitoring, they are reporting sometimes if they see something hate speech, because now they know the definition of. So I think this is the biggest achievement. Now people are clear about what is hate speech and where is freedom of speech. So sometimes yeah, this was this happened in our case.
Sorry, this is really interesting, Sabiha. And in a way, what happened is the young people have taken on the role of monitoring some of the social media that they're consuming to look for hate speech. But Harun, some people would argue that this should be the role of the social media companies. So I just want to turn to you and ask you about your experiences of reporting breaches of content policies or community standards to the social media companies, and how your experience of that has been. Can you tell us about that?
Harun can tell.
Sure. I think it's very important question in terms of engagement, and especially with regards to countering hate speech, because we believe that it's not only us as civil society who has the responsibility to work on hate speech issues, but it's something that needs a holistic approach where we should engage a variety of stakeholders, especially governments, and then when it comes to countering hate speech in online spaces. So definitely social media companies are one big stakeholder. And with regards to that, we have done a lot of efforts, and I think it's not only me or Bytes for All, other organizations are also there MRG has done quite a lot of work when it comes to engaging different social media companies. With regards to our experience working with the social media companies such as Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, they are different. I would categorically say that there are certain social media companies who are totally non-responsive. When we try to engage them with regards to content removal, which is dangerous, which falls under the dangerous speech, and which we believe that can incite violence. So they are totally non-responsive, and their behavior is not very much supportive. But then there are certain organization, social media companies. I can name one at least, and that is Facebook, where we see that they have enabled certain mechanisms where we can easily engage with them. They have enabled certain mechanism for certain people who are doing work in this domain in different countries, which they can utilize, and they can escalate their request for removal of certain dangerous content. So yeah, I mean, in that context, we appreciate that effort. But when it comes to really resolving the issue, for example, if there is a content that we want to remove it immediately because we believe that that content can lead into violence, there they would slack. So their response is very sluggish. At times they would not respond at all. Then we have to utilize other ways to engage. For example, if I'm in Pakistan and in South Asian region, and we report a certain content from here, so we have to report it to a Singapore office of Facebook or other social media companies. But when we don't receive a response from our concerned office or hub, so then we have to think of other ways to engage, such as we have to mobilize other partners sitting in different other regions, for example, in US. So from there, we have to mobilize them that they need to immediately react on certain content that is that has potential to incite violence. So I mean, this is how we are working, but in general terms, they don't take it their responsibility. And in case of certain social media platforms such as TikTok, I mean, they even don't have any understanding. They are although removing certain content, but their procedures are not transparent. We don't know what are their standards for hate speech, what sort of content they are removing with human intervention or through automation. So I mean, these are the areas that we I think need to work on, and we need to engage, because TikTok has a special context as it is a Chinese corporate entity, and it's very difficult for us to agree them to consider their or enable their human rights approach on such issues. So I mean, it's a gray area totally for us. We are unable to engage them in that concept. And Twitter and YouTube, it's again very hard to get certain content. And YouTube is one of the biggest platform where we believe it is one of the biggest responsible for spreading hate all across the world.
Okay, thank you so much, Harun. So that sounds like that's going to be a continuing challenge moving forward. So this is very much a conversation rather than a presentation. So if anyone in the audience has a question, do pop it in the Q&A, and we will come to them as and when. So I've actually got a really interesting question in the Q&A, which is asking us really about candidates in elections potentially using hate speech as a kind of electoral, as a way of gaining votes, let's say, of getting people to rally behind a candidate. Is that something that's familiar with you? And is that something either of you would like to make a comment on? Just before you do that, there is a piece in the toolkit about this, about monitoring hate speech during elections, but it was actually completed by our partner in Myanmar. who sadly couldn't join us on this webinar because of their internet connectivity. But there is so there are some examples or some materials in the toolkit that do talk about this. But it's such an interesting question, and Sabiha is nodding. So I'm going to go to Sabiha, confident that she has something to say.
Can you repeat the question, please?
It's about people using hate speech in political campaigns.
For political campaigns.
Yeah.
Why I was noting, actually, we did one study in 2018, during 2018 elections in Pakistan about hate speech. And yes, unfortunately, across the parties, they use this hate speech with each other. And unfortunately, in Pakistan, our political parties, they use this religion card as well. And they to obviously it spread a lot of hatred. So, you know, when in 2018 we did this study, and that the people used lot of lot of words and sentences against each other, where they target gender. For example, in Pakistan, we have a political party and Pakistan People's Party, and the chairperson of Pakistan People's Party, Bilawal Bhutto, he's a young boy. He's a very handsome young boy. But the opposition, they always target him as like transgender person. So no, and it was very common that during election campaign, and definitely then they hit each other on their physical appearance, on their on their communication style and communication, and then their lot of things, lot of other things, because in Pakistan we have different kind of hate speech. For example, they can say something on your background, where are you from? So yeah, it happens. Unfortunately, in Pakistan it's a lot. Political parties use this hate speech with each other, and across party.
Claire, can I also add something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's a very strong tool for political parties when it comes to electioneering. I was just working on this small report that focused on this by-election that just concluded on 17th of July in Punjab, where 20 constituencies there was a by-election. So I was just tracking a couple of important conversations where out of the context, some of the interviews were quoted, and they were presented by the supporter of a certain political parties to demean their or to discourage their opponents' voters. For example, PMLN's support, this TLP, Tehreek Labbaik Pakistan, it's a religious outfit in Pakistan, and now it's a political party too. So their political candidates and supporters were trying to portray Imran Khan's party, and especially Imran Khan, as a supporter of Ahmadis. And you know, whenever a certain political leader is portrayed in a way that they have a soft corner for Ahmadis, and the larger context of Ahmadis, it is something that damages their reputation, because no one wants to knowingly or unknowingly be associated with such group who is being persecuted, and larger population has a huge hatred for them on religious grounds. So I mean, it is very much there. It's not only one incident. There are a lot of other incidents. I can quote another one from the same by-election episode that are one of mainstream political parties, a vice president who was leading the campaign of their political party, Pakistan Muslim League Noon's Maryam Nawaz. She actually visited a constituency in Jhang, where the political candidate who was fighting on their ticket, not actually their ticket, but they actually were supporting the candidate as an independent candidate, and she went to that person's political campaign to seek vote from the voters, and that candidate belonged to a band outfit, Sipai Sahaba, and that Sipai Sahaba outfit is notorious when it comes to sectarian violence, especially against Shia Muslims in Pakistan. So, I mean, this sort of political backing is always there for certain candidates in Pakistan. And it's not only a PMLN. I'm not only targeting one political party, but it is the same case when it comes to Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf. When it comes to Pakistan People's Party in Sindh, for example, we know that in forced conversion of Hindu minority girls in Sindh is a big issue. And one of the main culprits is a religious landlord in Ghotki who always fights, who always contests election. And People's Party at one time, they provided them a ticket, and he got elected on People's Party's ticket. And if we see their manifesto of Pakistan People's Party, they show themselves as a very liberal and inclusive and a party that respects the human rights of everyone. But on ground, the realities are different when it comes to because in Pakistan, election is the game of electables. It's not votes are not ideological in majority cases. So, I mean, these are real issues. Elections are one of the biggest happenings in Pakistan whenever or wherever they are happening. So hate speech is used as a tool for votes.
Yeah, and it's very, very damaging because in the process it otherizes, as we say, it increases the social disharmony, increases the difference between diverse community members. To answer our questioner, it's very rare to see examples where this tendency, which is increasing around the world currently, actually in a very dangerous way, is being actively countered. There are a few examples in Western democracies where essentially parties have agreed a kind of gentleman's agreement, agreement to not discuss certain issues that are very divisive in society. Often migration issues would be the typical example, perhaps in some Western European countries. But certainly in the global South, I think there are very few examples where that's being achieved, and it's an issue that minority rights is very concerned about. I want to take another question from the audience, which is to ask, and maybe this should go to Haroon initially, what are the national laws about hate speech in Pakistan? So if the social media companies aren't necessarily able to act effectively, are there laws that the authorities can use?
Yeah, sure. Definitely, Pakistan is one of the countries where you will find laws for everything. And we also have law for hate speech, not only for hate speech in offline spaces, but in online spaces as well. For example, Section 11 of Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act 2016, it contains a clause that covers the hate speech crimes. In the context of ethnic minorities, religious minorities, and linguistic minorities. But the issue is the implementation of the law. Unfortunately, we have seen that authorities would invoke these laws like when it comes to issues related to a high-profile cases. They will not activate these laws. They will not use these laws in case when a normal or lay person is being affected. For example, if hate speech is becoming a source of crime against Shia or any other religious minority, for example, Hindus or Ahmadis. So, I mean, it's less likely that government itself will use this law to stop the crime. It's a discriminatory use of these laws. And then another issue that we have seen in hate speech laws is that hate speech laws are there, but the definitions are not clear. Sabia was just mentioning earlier that our law doesn't provide a clear distinction between alleged speech and a hate speech or dangerous speech. So, I mean, it is a debate where sometime government, if they would activate this clause, but we also see that freedom of expression in some cases it becomes a target, or there will be compromise on free speech. So I mean, these are the issues right now in Pakistan that Pakistani civil society is trying to address with the help of different stakeholders, through lobbying with the parliamentarians and like-minded groups. So yeah, laws are very much there.
Thank you, Haroon. So it's not just the students who are struggling with the delineation between free speech and hate speech. I just want to come back to Sabiha a moment, because earlier you mentioned that you'd run these social action projects. Can you give us some examples of the sorts of things that students did?
Yeah. Actually, I just want to share with you this data. During this project, as I mentioned earlier, students actually really enjoyed after this training and orientation sessions. Then they did 88 youth-led social action projects across all 4 provinces of Pakistan, involving 2,631 students. Then we have 60 social action projects engaged 1,791 of their peer youth, including 1,017 male and 771 female youth, and 276 from the minority communities. And then we have another 20 social action projects, because these are like 1 year, first year, second year, third year. Then we have 20 social action projects, engaged 600 students through articles, Facebook, Insta live sessions, and video clips. And next we have a few more social action. And basically these are I shared breakdown with you, but total 88 youth-led social action projects has happened in this project. And if we talk about the impact, yes, we have impact on these social action projects and this project. We can't claim, obviously, in 3 years that we have changed everything, but still, I think it's very amazing that we can see impact. For example, now we have in universities, we engaged these societies, because in every university we have student societies, student clubs. So we engaged them. No, actually now they have a kind of informal mechanism in form of student societies, where a lay person, a common student can share if he or she is facing hate speech. So he or she can contact the student societies and explain that he or she is facing. So I think this is a formal mechanism in universities, and we can try to make it from formal mechanism even in universities. And same, I just want to share another thing. We have, basically we are working with marginalized communities, where this Christians and Muslim communities are living together, and we have local peace structure groups. We have formed groups which consist of both Muslim and Christians. So, and again, we have very formal way of mechanism in these societies and UCs, union councils, where people can contact these LPS, we call LPS, local peace structure, if they facing hate speech. So it's really, we are getting results. Now when people complain, then this group LPS, local peace structure, they take action, and they try to resolve their issue within the community. So I think these are informal mechanism we are actually at least practicing. When we talk about the impact again, so one thing, now student can complain and they can go to student societies. Then we have another very interesting impact, because during COVID, our students and trainees, they runs a lot of campaigns on Twitter. Unfortunately, during COVID, our religious minorities, they were more affectee. They suffered more than like Muslim majorities. So, even unfortunately, when people of Pakistan and Muslim majority, they give charity during COVID. Sometimes they don't give this charity to Christians because this is their faith, especially in Ramzan. This is their faith that they can give this charity only to Muslim. So we started this campaign, not we, these trainees and our young students and volunteers. They started campaigns on Twitter where they requested people to include religious minorities for charity because they are equal citizen and they are Pakistani and they are in trouble too. And then then the impact we can share, that people share their personal stories. And trust me, these personal stories, it works a lot. Because when you share your personal story, people think differently. If you share it happens here and there, people say, okay, fine, it happens, but not with us and not among us. But when people share their personal stories, then it was very motivational part of the project. And people committed, especially the Muslim majority. They said, okay, we will work for this issue. This is really serious issues. People around us, they are suffering. Then definitely we have recommendations from this work. We need to promote online youth platform. We need to promote youth platform, maximum youth platform where they can talk and they can share things and they can share their stories. And definitely a balance between free speech and hate speech, because this is really our issue. When we say hate speech, people immediately said this happened in Western countries and this is hate speech against Muslim. So they can't make difference and differentiate between freedom of speech, as Harun mentioned, and this is same is happening even on state level. Our government is also confused. They mix this thing. For example, they can under this law Harun mentioned, they can pick me up. They can say, you are talking like this, you are doing this. So under this law and under this section, we can arrest you. Then promote peaceful messages through personal accounts of hate speech and religious discrimination. The best thing to counter hate speech, to promote peace messaging. Unfortunately, it's very unfortunate. It's very common in our society. For example, when we say hate speech, because it's very common to say someone, just if you don't like someone, you will just say him or her like bad words, and those bad words, no, not bad words, like to identify other religion. So it's I don't want to use those words. For example, the word and so they have kind of identify like other religion. So this is a gali, this is an abusive language for people. So, and it's very common, and it's very common. For example, it's very normalized. It has a very normal, it is very normal thing in our society. So it's very, very difficult to tell them, okay, don't use this word. Trust me, even we had this campaign, Christian people, they said, don't call us Isai, call us Masihi. So we started this campaign, don't call them this, call them Masihi. And people resisted. I mean, it's very normal thing. But there is nothing harm to call them as they want to be called. But people resisted. So I think it's not easy. So we need to work on it a lot, on every front. Then obviously we need policy interventions to reduce hate speech and religious discrimination on campuses, because again we will talk about campusing. Work with student societies on campus for sustainability, encourage dialogue between different youth. Now, as I mentioned, we are working in universities, and even during this project we work with universities. Universities are open, and now we are trying to even see their bylaws, their like SOPs, as a university, but the rules they have, as mentioned, as Harun mentioned, we have state law, but then definitely universities are independent. They can make their own SOPs, not law, but SOPs and rules and regulations. And we are trying to tell them and convince them to put this word hate speech in their SOPs and in their laws and in their bylaws. So and after that, what we have planned, we think we should have separate student societies, because we have a lot of student societies, and student have one student society where they can talk about peace building and hate speech, and maybe they can call it peace society and maybe peace building society. So we need to promote more and more peaceful narratives, peaceful messages, to counter this hate speech.
Okay, so that's really interesting, Sabiha. Haroon, I just want to turn to you, because Sabiha was working in universities with one group of people, but you also ran a campaign which is covered in the toolkit, called #IDon'tForwardHate, which I think had a different target audience. So would you like to share a little bit about that with us?
Yeah, definitely. It's very interesting. But before going to that, Claire, I want to draw your attention towards Pishtiwan, because he is very much
I know. I'm aware. I have tried to send him a link. I think Noah's tried to send him a link, and Loic as well. So hopefully he'll join us momentarily. Thank you.
Okay. And regarding I don't forward hate speech, actually, as Sabia was mentioning, that to counter hate speech, it's very important to create more peaceful speech and to make more people aware. And in the context of Pakistan, because we are working more in the digital spaces, so when we analyzed the data of in the context of outreach of social media in Pakistan, and then we came to know that majority people who are accessing internet, or who are connected with internet, are between the ages of 15 and 35, and then there is another bracket of 46 to 55. So this gives us a very clear understanding that who we have to engage with more if we are interested to counter hate speech in online space, especially. So this campaign, we actually the idea of this campaign we conceived to counter hate speech, and we actually engaged youth in that campaign. And we initially did not reach out directly to universities, but we worked with a group of production team that was young students who are studying at the media and communication department at a university in Islamabad. So we engaged them, and we talked to them that there is an opportunity where they can actually create messages, video messages, and other content that we from our platform can use as a campaign to counter hate speech. This really helped us in a way that when we created those video messages and actually shot video films highlighting the issues of religious minorities in Pakistan related to hate crimes. So it provided us a window to engage with youth directly. And then we also tried to engage with the youth through social media platforms, for example, social media, Facebook and Twitter and other social media platforms. So from there, we actually sought support from youth. And then we also engaged like-minded organizations to support our campaign, hashtag I don't forward hate. So it was a kind of a pilot campaign from our side that we launched in 2021 in February, and we got a very interesting response on that, and people got engaged in that campaign, because everyone and especially in Twitter, because audience are more literate and they understand these issues, so they supported our campaign in a very good way. And then we also received pledges as well. People, when they saw our pictures or placards or our other content, so they also created their pledges, photo pledges, and they sent us to include into our campaign. So, I mean, this was very encouraging for us that this is how we could broaden the scope of our campaign. And then in the second phase, we also ran university shows roadshows where we directly approached the youth and talked about hate speech issues, and the response was again very encouraging. And this campaign is ongoing, and we hope that more and more people would join us in countering hate speech in online and offline space. I think it's a very important to engage youth, because they from our data, they are the people who are more engaged in online hate speech, and they are the more people that we believe can help us countering hate speech as well.
Thank you so much, Haroon. You should see that Pishtuwan Faraj Mohammed has successfully joined us as a panelist, which is great. If the audience can bear with us, we did start 4 minutes late, so we might end 4 minutes late. But do obviously, if you need to jump off, you can jump off. Just so we can have the benefit of Pishtuwan from IMOC, whose organization I introduced at the beginning, joining us. I mean, we've been chatting, unfortunately, without you, Pishtuwan, but I just wanted to turn to the issue of journalists, because I know that IMOC, we haven't talked about journalists yet, but I think journalists are quite important when it comes to hate speech. So would you just tell us a little bit about IMOC's work in terms of educating journalists and how that went?
Sure. Thank you so much for the interesting conversation. Actually, this project has been very useful, and it was quite timely project for Iraq and Kurdistan region. We, as independent organization, media in Kurdistan, we reached out not only to journalists, we also held dozens of consultative sessions with representatives of religious minority stakeholders in Erbil, in Mosul, in Baghdad. We had meeting, consultation within Shia and Sunni endowment, respectively. And also we have trained a series of 3 training for 45 senior journalists who were responsible for reporting, especially in Basra, Baghdad, Erbil, that's the northern, the middle part and southern part of Iraq. Our training covered many forms of religious hate speech and the consequences of religious hate speech, and how to avoid the common pitfalls when reporting sensitive contents and stories about ethnic and religious minorities and religious differences. So the training for the journalists were quite useful and fruitful, because most of those senior journalists, actually it was during the pandemic we did the training. I remember part of the training was done online, but the others were face-to-face. So the training material were based on social media monitoring activity and included good and bad practices, as well as real-life consequences of both online and offline hate speech. The training were encouraged to report content in a way that exhibits critical thinking, that fosters mutual understanding and resists sectarian narrative, which is poses a great danger to Iraq even right now. I mean, the current crisis we have with the government formation, so there has been a rise of sectarian narratives, religious differences. So our training was in the right time, in the right place. And we had 2-day workshops on grassroots advocacy campaigns. The project, and we also produced a series of material, raising awareness, education material. We produced 612 brochures presenting the statistics and the finding of our project in both Arabic and Kurdish language, the 2 dominant language in our country. And we also produced 260 handbooks, serving as a guide for practitioners in both Arabic and Kurdish languages. And we distributed them to the stakeholders, those who are working in the media. Of course, this toolkit as well came later. So this is very useful as well to add on our previous works we did to raising awareness of journalists, because we know that in Iraq, journalists play a very important role in peace building process and or in provoking polarization, as we have seen right now in Iraq. There is a huge debate about a leaky document, some senior Shiite leaders attacking the others. So we did these trainings so that the journalists play their part. They are very important stakeholders in educating the society, in working for social cohesion, for tolerance, for peaceful coexistence, rather than provocation, polarization, and the division of the society into us and their mindset and or attitude.
I think I'm going to have to stop you there, Pishwan. I'm sorry. I
Yes,
know you could talk
yes.
for a long time about this topic, but
Yes.
we're very close to the end of our time now. So I just want to ask each of you one final question and give you 1 minute to answer it, which is that if you were speaking to someone who is going to start work on hate speech in their country tomorrow, start with Biha, what piece of advice would you give them in 1 minute?
Obviously, it's difficult to summarize in a minute, but I will try that. What we need, I think we need to change our curriculum, our school curriculum. And I will focus because unfortunately, hate speech start from our curriculum in our childhood. Even it's really difficult for me to undo things which I have learned when I was a child in my school through my books. And I have done one study, which I will definitely send you an email, when I was very young, on our curriculum, and especially jihadi schools curriculum. So when a child, a 4 or 5 years old child, learns something, it's really difficult to undo and unlearn. Thank you.
That's true. That's a good point. Harun, what advice would you give to someone sitting out?
Yes, exactly. It's very difficult to summarize this thing in 1 minute, but starting from scratch, when it comes to working on the hate speech issues in any country, every country has a different context. So I would advise people to stick to very basics first. And that basics would start from planning and scoping of entire situation in that country. That includes the scoping of the real issues, scoping of the concerned stakeholders, where it's very important to engage with them for lobbying and networking. And then the laws that are in different countries have a very negative impact on the entire situation. I think this is very basic that we should work on from in a country that you are going to start hate speech work.
Okay, thank you very much. Pishtuan, in 1 minute, what advice would you give someone starting in a new country?
First of all, if I meet a new person from another country, I would recommend they read our toolkit, which is a product of our 3-year-long years of documentation and learning from our experience in countering hate speech. So that will be my advice first. And second, I will also recommend that the most important thing is in finding counter narratives to hate speech. And as my colleague said, so it's very important we focus on education, but I would add also one point for it, not only education, but education born from empathy remains the most important tool in combating hate speech. Finding what unites us, finding what makes us human beings, what are the things that we share together, rather than what are the things that divide us.
Okay, thank you very, very much for that. So we're literally in our last 90 seconds. So I'm going to wrap up and say thank you so much to our 3 panelists, Sabiha, Harun, and Pishtuan, and encourage everybody on this call to go and look at the toolkit and use it. We have tried to create it as a springboard, so that rather than having to learn as you go along, which all of our partners did in this process, maybe there is some learning already there. And if you do embark on this journey and you hit a buffer or a problem, do come and talk to us, and we'll be available to sort of try to lend you any support that that we can. But thank you very, very much for everyone for joining us on this call today. It's been great to talk to you, Sabiha, Haroon, and Pishtiwan, and thank you very much for sparing the time and sharing your very valuable experience with the people who are listening today. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.